There's a video trending on Buzzfeed right now called "I Stopped Believing in God After Pastoring a Megachurch." Now, I loved and I hated this video, and here's why. Okay, so to start, my first thought when I watched this video was, look how relatable this video is to people. So many people can relate to exactly how this lady feels. Even I can understand how she feels, because when I was about 15 or so, I went to a church and I had a similar experience. So here's how she described her experience.
So we end up getting a job at a really big church in Michigan. And this church was the size of a mall. I mean, it's huge. There's about 10,000 people. We built a house out in the country. They paid for our car, for our gas. They paid for Michael's school. We were 20 years old and we had this dream job. We didn't have sex with each other before we were married. We waited to kiss. We did it all right. We had this transactional idea of God, and that's why we landed this really great, awesome job.
Now, I love how she called her view the transaction model, because I think that's a good name for it. Ultimately, her view was that because her and her husband were spiritual enough or good enough or moral enough, they didn't have sex before they were married or anything like that. Because of that, God blessed them with their dream job where they were able to work at a church full time. The church paid for their housing, paid for her husband's school, and so on. But then she said this happened.
We started trying to get pregnant and we couldn't get pregnant. And people would tell me, but just pray and believe, like, just say it and it will happen. And I thought, I just don't know how that can be true. So I came back and found myself trying to pray for us to have a baby, or pray for our church, or pray for these different things. And I just kept thinking about the concentration camp and how my whole perspective on my faith has been a transaction. If I'm good enough, or if I pray enough, if I believe enough, then I get blessings and I get a baby or a good life.
Now it seems that God failed her. She couldn't get pregnant and she started to see bad things, and bad things started to happen. And what was the response from her church friends? They said that if she just prayed more, she believed it, then she would get pregnant. And by saying this, these people actually just reinforced the transaction model. They pretty much were saying that as long as she prays more and she tries harder and she's more spiritual in some way, then God will give her a baby and a good life. What's ironic about this is because she believed in the transaction model, when things started to go bad, it started making her doubt her faith. But then people would respond by trying to have her keep her faith by just telling her again the transaction model. So what did she do? She tried harder to be more spiritual, but still things never got better and she couldn't get pregnant still. So because this transaction model was foundational to her understanding of Christianity, she naturally started to conclude that Christianity must be false. And here's the next part of her story.
We all had this perspective on who was in and who was out. For Michael and I, that began to change slowly. You have to conform, and if you have doubts, you're a dangerous person. I remember looking around going, what am I doing here? What am I building with my life? We realize we're no good for this place that we're at because our ideas have changed so much, and that we needed to leave. I started weeping and crying and freaking out, going, what are we doing? We don't know what we're doing. Do you realize what we just left? Like, we left all of our security and we started becoming heretics, you know.
Now, watching this clip kind of made me cringe because it was clear how much she really loved her family. And what's worse is when she started expressing her doubts, they began to start pushing her out of the group. Now I can completely relate because something similar to that happened to me when I was younger, and that no doubt started turning me off of Christianity. I wish I could say that this wasn't very common, but I remember when I studied deconversion statistics maybe a few years ago, I remember that this was one of the final nails in the coffin for a lot of people when it came to Christianity. And to make matters worse, the group eventually attacked her using the same transaction model that they gave her that gave her the doubts in the first place. When she revealed that her daughter had Down syndrome and her daughter was sick and having these health issues, they responded by attacking her, saying that this was God's punishment for her heresy and her rebellion. Now, as I learned later in life, after I got a chance to rid my mind of everything that I previously learned about Christianity and just try to start completely over, when I started reading the Bible, I found that the transaction model just can't be correct. I mean, honestly, you could probably take anybody that you can think of right now out of the Bible, and then you'll have confirmation of what I'm saying. Job was called the most righteous man of his day, and he suffered like ridiculously. Paul and the other apostles were beaten, tortured, and ultimately murdered. The most good, the most moral, the most spiritual person in the Bible, Jesus, was also tortured, persecuted, and killed. So if there's one thing that can't be at the foundation of Christianity, it's the teaching that if you're moral enough, spiritual enough, or good enough, then God will bless you and give you a bunch of stuff and also give you a great life. Now I want you to think about something else. If the only reason why you're doing these good things is so that way God will give you more stuff and bless you and give you a good life, then ultimately you aren't really doing these good things for other people or for God. On the transaction model, it's actually impossible to serve God and others because ultimately you're just serving yourself. What's so ironic about this is that this model has an emphasis on being moral, but at its foundation, it's ultimately immoral. It's only when we understand the main point of Christianity that we can start to do good things for God and others. The entire Bible in a nutshell is something like, none of us can be perfect, and because God is perfectly just, he's got to punish every single wrongdoing. But because God is perfectly merciful, he provided a way for us to be rightly related to him despite our moral failings. And the way he did this was by loving us enough to put on human flesh, coming into our world and offer himself as a sacrifice for all of our wrongdoings. So the point here is that none of us are accepted by God because we're good enough, moral enough, or spiritual enough. It's actually kind of the opposite. We're actually accepted by God because we're not any of those things, and we recognize that. If what we really want is God, then we have everything we need the second that we decide to allow Jesus' sacrifice to cover our wrongdoings. We aren't earning our salvation or God's acceptance by being more moral or more good or more spiritual. We already are accepted. Once we understand that, only then can we start to serve God and others for the right reasons and not just so that way we can get stuff from God. The problem with motivating people to be good so that way they can get things from God is that you're ultimately motivating them to be selfish. And when they don't get what they want, they ultimately conclude that Christianity must not be true. So what I really kind of hated about this video was that it was sad to me that unfortunately she learned this model from her church and from other Christians that she was talking to. She believed that if she was good enough, moral enough, or spiritual enough, then good things would happen. And the inverse to that is if she's bad or she has doubts or she's not moral enough, not spiritual enough, or not good enough, then bad things will happen. Once she realized that this was obviously false, then her faith began to crumble. As long as you have the transaction model, you'll always have the wrong expectations and you'll never truly understand what Christianity is really all about. So next time you hear a story like this, what are you gonna say? What do you mean? What's up guys, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, then go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that way you can change it from red to gray. And then once you're done with that, go ahead and hit the like button and make sure you share the video too so that way people can know what Christianity is really all about. Also, if you want to help support us and be part of this journey with us, then go ahead and check out the link in the description to our Patreon. And that's really all I have. See you guys next time. Oh yeah, check out one of these videos.